pills would ease the pain.
This is the first thing Max Payne says the first time you pick up a bottle of painkillers inside of Roscoe Street Station. While this can be dismissed as a throwaway line, simply describing the use of a health recovery mechanic, it would be the first, and at least in my experience, the only time a healing item would play such an integral part in the development of a character. It was there, in the decrepit subway, that Max's true development began. When you pick up a recovery item in most video games, whether that be a first aid kit, food, or even a simple first aid spray, the game treats it as that, a tool for recovery. It leaves it at that, and never dives into the detail of what it actually does for or to the player character. Not here, though. From the second you take your very first painkiller in the series, it begins an 11-year-long cycle of addiction and self-loathing that would become the key elements in the character of Max Payne. Being through as much as he has, the murder of his young family, the survival's guilt that came with it, the death of his unhealthy coping mechanism, and not to mention the canonically hundreds of people he's personally killed, it only makes a sad sense that he would become a full-blown alcoholic and addicted to painkillers. Max's life is a train wreck. His family destroyed, his career ended, and his home permanently haunted by the nightmares he's lived through. Regardless of where Max's life took him, he didn't care anymore. In his eyes, if he died, at least he had one last sip of scotch to numb whatever feeling seeped into his drug-riddled nerves. Hi, I'm Sam, and welcome to Late to the Party, a new look at old media. Today, we will be talking about Max Payne, but more specifically, Max Payne as a character and his personal growth and development when it comes to the last entry in the series. This is less of a review of Max Payne 3, and more of a look back at the memorable aspects of that game, and why I personally believe Max Payne as a character deserves to be talked about more, and why the writers simply don't get enough credit for him. With that though, I am going to give out a quick spoiler warning for this now 9-year-old game and its predecessors, so if that's something you care about and you want to go into this blind, consider this your spoiler warning. If you have no knowledge of either of the first two entries, here's a very brief recap. Max Payne was a young police detective living in New Jersey with the American dream come true. A large home in the suburbs, a loving wife, and a newborn baby. That dream suddenly turned into a nightmare when one night his family was slaughtered by drug addicts sent from forces unknown and his world is torn apart.
Michelle! Freeze! NYPD, drop it!
The first game consists of Max going undercover with the DEA to not only find the source of this new street drug, but also to fulfill his revenge on those responsible for his family's murder, getting caught up in a government conspiracy along the way. The second game then takes place 2 years later. Max goes back to the NYPD, and one night, a femme fatale from the first game shows back up, leading Max to make stupid mistakes trying to protect her, including murdering his own partner. The game ends with his unhealthy love interest/coping mechanism dead, Max's career being shamed for taking the side of a fugitive, and after all the series of events leading up to that point, Max is left with nothing more than his own torment and survivor's guilt, having fallen even deeper than before. And while I'm leaving out an insane amount of detail, that is where Max is going into the final entry. Broken, alone, and incredibly depressed.
Hi, this is Mona. What's your name?
I just need someone to talk to.
Honey, this is a phone sex line. All we do is talk.
Right.
After initial reports of a recast, James McCaffrey once again returns to lend his gravelly voice to the character, delivering heart-aching monologues and badly timed jokes at every turn. In the first game, a lack of budget forced the appearance of Max to be based on the likeness of series writer Sam Lake, and due to that game's explosive success, developers Remedy Entertainment used the likeness of professional actor Timothy Gibbs for the second entry. Here, though, Max Payne is now voiced, modeled, and portrayed via motion capture entirely by James McCaffrey himself, solidifying his overall legacy towards the character. And personally, regardless of growing up with the series and playing them all in order, McCaffrey is the one I think of when I think of Max Payne.
But I take shot in the head over a slow roast on a spit any day of the goddamn week.
The first half of the game has Max drinking his way through each mission, half blacked out and drifting like a ghost of a man who once had everything. Even if the events of the game didn't take place, the kidnapping didn't happen, and the conspiracy is untrue, Max says it best. He's trapped in a country he doesn't speak the language of, he's forced to be around people he can't stand, and he seems to be the only one who acknowledges the slums down below through the strobe lights and coked-out partygoers he's being paid to babysit. all while being on a 4-drink minimum. When it comes to being a bodyguard, he can't muster up 1 single gram of responsibility during the job, but God help you if you're the one who made shit go south. Rockstar Games Vice President Dan Houser once said it best. He wants to be a thinker, but he's much better as a doer. When he thinks, he gets wrapped up in himself or makes mistakes. When he acts, he is brilliant, almost superhuman. That is his character, and the dichotomy between the two is the reality of his life and at the heart of the game. He cannot seem to move forward emotionally, but physically, he is relentless. This is especially present in the early stages of the game. Regardless of the haze currently obstructing his senses, he's still a force to be reckoned with. Whether it's through years of experience or sheer dumb luck, his bullets find their target, and he manages to walk away with his life every time. A running theme of all the entries in the series is the overall branching puzzle you are shown from the start. Like all great puzzles, all the pieces are laid out in front of you from the very beginning. Sometimes you don't realize what's important until the puzzle starts to take shape. It's only after witnessing a flash of the solution and building back to that do you realize the significance of each piece. Just like the beginning of every Max Payne game, every clue is there from the start, but you just never see the full forest when you're lost in the trees. Or at least in Max's case, lost in alcohol-infused gray matter. If you've never heard of the Max Payne franchise, and don't know the story of the previous entries, that's honestly okay here. Because the story is told in a non-linear fashion, flashbacks are shown and discussed in various portions of the game, both to remind returning fans of a past once lived, and to give fresh players a vague idea as to why Max is such a haunted and depressed man drunk on cynicism and self-loathing. And where key details of the previous games are mentioned, the finer why details are left out, prompting newcomers to fill in the dots themselves. While yes, the stories of both other games are engaging unto themselves and deserve to be discussed at a later time, not knowing these stories isn't a deterrent here. As is the style for the series, Max is the one telling the story in a flashback from the very beginning. He wouldn't bother repeating his entire life story or both games into level-to-level detail, just a horrifically depressing highlight reel. And from a storytelling standpoint, what is more engaging? Seeing a grown man broken from the life he's been forced to watch burn? Or sifting through the ashes yourself and piecing together the dots on your own? There is no wrong answer, but regardless, in most game sequels, characters aren't really shown to suffer too much from their past actions. Their story was told and they move on with their life. Characters are rarely shown to have any mental or psychological scars that follow them. They might mention the past events briefly, but they don't hold on to them nearly as much. But Rockstar Games did something bold. They chose to truly humanize Max. They chose to continue the series in real time. It's been 9 years between the second and third entries, and in that time, Max has spent his days lounging in a dive bar blocks from his home. When it comes to visual media, great writers know when subtle details can have the biggest impact. A great example of this is when we see Max's living spaces. He doesn't care anymore. In his half-condemned New Jersey apartment complex, Max keeps piles of trash and empty liquor bottles strewn about.
I guess I thought if I was going to be shot in the face in here, it would probably be me pulling the trigger.
When he moves into his apartment in Sao Paulo, well yes, it's obviously an upgrade from his last place, nothing about what Max does in his free time really changed. He doesn't take anything with him, just a small bag full of clothes and the one possession that really means anything to him, a picture of his late wife and daughter. He still welcomes every night with a bottle or two of Kong whiskey and a Skittles bag full of painkillers, quietly sobbing over what he's lost, passing out at his table, only to chase off the next morning's hangover with a cocktail or 3 for brunch. While he can leave Hoboken behind, he can't leave behind all the pain it's caused him. His habits don't change. Moving on from that unimaginable amount of grief takes more than changing your zip code. Simply put, by this point, he knows what he's become. Compared to the last game, Max is much older and slower. Canonically, he was born in 1964, making him 48 during the time of this game. And for at least the time between the last game, he has been fueling his body with a steady drip of booze and downers. A once thin, athletic young man is now a grizzled, overweight loser with a pickled liver and slowed reflexes. When it comes to connecting this to the actual gameplay, if you notice, in at least the first game, after Max dives into bullet time, he springs off the floor, ready for action. Here, weakened by years of substance abuse and the onset of early aging, Max has to wind up before he dives, and instead of springing up, he lifts himself off the floor slowly, exposing himself for a tense few seconds, leading to a lot of forethought as to where you will end up before you dive. This in turn breeds an entirely new game mechanic. Max can stay put on the ground if he wishes. Sometimes you can be overwhelmed and need to dive to cover, buying yourself a better chance to take a painkiller, or catch the enemy off guard by shooting their ankles out from under a table. Either way, this all rears back to his coping mechanisms and the toll they have taken on him. During the earliest flashback, Max is taunted by the gangsters at his favorite bar, and even with a gun to his face, he's still a smartass. He cares so much about his own life that he taunts these chumps, pointing a loaded .45 directly in his face. He barely flinches, perhaps daring them to shoot him and put an end to his miserable existence. Even after an old police academy acquaintance saves him from that fate, he still gets his name wrong, despite being told it only seconds earlier.
Yeah, well, why don't you drive on off back into the sunset there, Pesos? It's been nice catching up.
At least let me buy you a drink.
Having such little faith in life anymore, Max gets ready to stumble on home, only entertaining Passos' job opportunity due to the free drink that came with it, complete with a massive dizzying effect reflecting Max's current vision through his own bloodshot eyes. But it's in these few moments, Max is granted a little levity for the first time in years, and he almost cracks a smile. Of course, the Payne luck quickly ruins any notion of a fun time, and his little flash of heroism ends up painting a target on his back yet again, forcing him to flee from the only place he's ever known. Problem is, he has one thing left to do before he leaves New Jersey forever. He wants to say goodbye to his late wife and daughter, but is quickly forced to take cover behind their tombstone, having it blown away by Mafia gunfire only seconds later, destroying what can be seen as the one anchor tying him to his past. He was either going to move on with life, or life was going to move on without him. Even though Max jokes about dying at every turn, making the player almost believe that Max wants to die, it's through Max's inebriated eyes that we see why exactly he keeps fighting here. Simply put, he's good at it. When he was in the police academy, Max was at the top of his class. As a cop, he won awards. As a DEA agent, even if he had ulterior motives, he still uncovered a massive illegal government super soldier program connected to the New York Mafia. It's no different here. He's been hired by a rich, influential family as a bodyguard, and since it's really the only thing he has going for him, it's apparent through his dialogue that he at least wants to do right by his employers. And even if those employers just view Max as an ex-cop disgraced by his previous actions, he still tries. He still tries to prove to both them and his newfound enemies that he is more than just a thug with bravado. And just as much as he wants to prove it to them, I think he wants to prove it to himself as well that he's still capable of doing some good with his life. Give him almost an impossible task, a loaded Beretta, and his signature ability to go into bullet time, and he can take on an army. Even though half the time, it's through drunken, disoriented luck that he survives their onslaught.
Taking the photo from the broken fragments, something caught my eye. Figures.
Whether it was from years of self-destruction and negligence, or through forces beyond his control, despite all his actions to tip the scale in his favor, Max once again is forced to watch what he cares about slowly burn and is left alone to deal with the consequences. With the family he was hired to protect dying around him, another conspiracy rearing its ugly head, and nothing to show for his nearly superhuman efforts, Max finally hits the deepest point of rock bottom, opening another bottle of whiskey, prepared to block yet another night out of ever-building guilt and self-hatred. That is, until he reflected. Looking into a mirror and seeing how far he let himself fall, he decides that if he dies, he at least wanted to know where the bullet hit from. Max decides to shave his head both to disguise himself and, more importantly, in an attempt to maintain some level of control over any aspect of his life. Personally, this cutscene, for as impactful as it is in terms of Max's development, it's almost hard for me to watch. It's something I myself have actually done. You hit such a point where everything goes wrong and you don't know what to do. So you do something extreme in an attempt to take that control back for yourself.
At least I was facing in the right direction.
I remember a lot of immediate hate for this choice when the trailer dropped, which to be honest, I never understood. People were furious when they saw a bald, bearded Miami Vice extra bathed in sunlight instead of the trenchcoat-clad, die-hard-style police detective they knew from before. It didn't look like the character of Max Payne. It wasn't New York or New Jersey. There wasn't a blizzard or even a Tiger Stripes t-shirt to be found. It was sunny Sao Paulo. As for myself, the only question racing through my mind was, how exactly did Max end up there? While some were outraged, I was curious. You have to think about it. Where was the character supposed to go after the last game? If he stayed in the police force, either as a detective or a desk jockey, it wouldn't make much sense. Even before the events of the final game, Max had killed literally hundreds of people. Even if his actions were all in self-defense, it wouldn't fit the character or even real-life expectations for him to stay in law enforcement. So between the events of the last two games, he's granted a small pension under the condition he retires from the force, spending all of his free time either sitting in front of a TV or sitting behind a bar. Eventually, life finds a way of forcing him forward.
I guess they helped with the grief.
This is another point of humanization on the writer's behalf. If your life consists of nothing but the weight of depression over your shoulders, and you wish to change that, something has to change. Sometimes, it's as simple as changing your daily routine, your diet, or even getting a hobby. Other times, extreme change is a solution. And for Max, it's being exposed to the harsh light of day. All the missions from this point on are in the sunlight, a first for the entire series. Which just goes to show that no matter what is going on inside the tornado that is Max's brain, the world in general simply doesn't care. The Earth is going to keep turning, regardless of the hardships he's gone through. From this point on, the game actually starts reflecting Max's choice. The filters and screen effects become less frequent, showing Max slowly drying out for the last third of the game. They still do make brief appearances, but only after a traumatic physical trauma, such as an explosion that may have caused a concussion, or when he begrudgingly is still forced to take painkillers that allow him to keep fighting through the numerous bullet wounds he receives. Although it's still implied that after all is said and done, if he is successful in his mission, he would be cutting those out as well.
One vice at a time.
After shaving his head, throwing on a glorious Hawaiian t-shirt with sunglasses, and going the only direction he knows, he decides that even if the people he was hired to protect are fractured, it's his responsibility to try to preserve the pieces that are left. Even if his internal monologues are still as cynical as ever, outwardly, he doesn't seem that way.
When you're stuck in a foreign country and you don't know the words for reverse charges, and you're in some lonely skin joint in the middle of some poor slum, having just had every last cent robbed from you, and you call yourself a bodyguard, then you know you're a loser.
After deciding to sober up, levels go from high-rise clubs and cruise ships to the slums, organ harvesting rings, and corrupt police precincts. He's cleaner, but the world around him is just as dirty, reflecting the demons he still has to fight through in the later half of the game. The odds are still as stacked against him as ever, but now, with a real purpose and a goal to drive him, flashes of a real hero break through. In Chapter 10, when Max and Giovanna are finally reunited, Max throws himself in front of her, shielding the recently pregnant woman from the hail of gunfire directed towards the duo. He reassures her that he will protect her, and is inspired by her ability to go on, despite seeing the gruesome execution of her own brother-in-law mere hours beforehand.
Giovanna was a brave girl. She wasn't giving up. I guess that meant neither could I. Well done.
De nada.
Stay close and keep quiet.
This shows that despite all the self-loathing and cynical view on what his life has become, deep down, Max is still a good person. He's not out simply for self-preservation. Part of not really caring if you live or die is the inherent stupid courage that comes with it.
You see what this is? Come on, anybody? Want to be a hero? I got nothing to lose, let's do it!
Despite his world being burned to the ground, he still tries to do good. Deep down, even if he doesn't want to admit it, he still cares.
At least I fucking tried!
Even when given the perfect opportunity to walk away and start his life fresh, he decides to clean up a mess that wasn't even his to begin with. An exhausted Max still wants to finish the job, regardless of obligation. If you hold on too tightly to the past behind you, you'll suffer the rope burns from the noose you carry with you. Whatever terrors were left crawling through the shadows of his mind, It's in the long, last terminal in the final airport level where one by one, just like every new goon that pops up with a gun pointed at Max, they are slain. The song that plays during the final onslaught could actually be interpreted as Max's own thoughts racing through his exhausted mind. Yes, the past 14 years have brought on terrible, terrible things. But it's here, with his sense of justice returning, with his self-respect in hand, and a determination to make things right, he finally realizes it's time to let go of his past. He's finally ready to move on. And with the job done, he does the hardest thing throughout the whole series. He forgives himself. If you live in the past, you don't allow yourself to have a future. How can you if every 5 minutes you check back to check your own footprints? Now, with all his darkness defeated, Max is allowed to walk into the sunset and live whatever life he chooses to. Max Payne deserved that ending. In the years following the third entry's release, there have been some small talks of a sequel. Some people believe that now, 9 years later, it's prime time to continue the story. But personally, I wholeheartedly disagree. The trilogy should be left at that. Each entry was a product of their own respective time in terms of graphic quality, budget, gameplay, and themes. I don't think it should be remade or have a sequel of any kind. Max Payne's American dream turned into a nightmare, and it was only through fighting through his own hell that he managed to come out on the other side. He lost everything, and now he gets a fresh start without the burden of his own guilt. Forcing a sequel simply because people enjoyed it would simply disregard the growth of the character entirely. Some stories don't need to be continued. The only time I personally would be okay with seeing where Max Payne is now is as an Easter egg in another Rockstar game. Maybe a picture of him on a beach somewhere, lemonade in hand and enjoying the sun. Lord knows he deserves it. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't thinking about making episodes on the other 2 entries in the series, as there's so much more worth talking about when it comes to Max Payne. For now, though, thank you for watching, and if you like this, consider hitting that like button, subscribing, and sharing this on social media. It would mean the absolute world to me. I also created a Twitter account, and the link for that is in the description. But, overall, thank you again for watching. And remember, if you're late to the party, it's still going on, so you might as well enjoy yourself. I'll see you next time.